All right. Welcome to the Front Porch Tailgate. Byron, we have a very special guest here. Why don't you introduce him?
Absolutely, Mike. So we got a young man here, one of the prides of Waterford, Michigan. Uh, he's a sports columnist for the Detroit News. He writes for the Wolverine Lounge. So I know him through my wife, and I'm happy to have him on here during this time of quarantine. But Eric, thanks for joining us, Mr. Eric Coughlin. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Eric, we appreciate you being here today on the show. Can you just start us off here? Take a few moments to tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up as a sports writer for the news.
Yeah, I was just a sports obsessed kid, like many of us are. But I was as interested in like the sports media side of things as much as the sports that were going on. I knew who all the broadcasters were, and I read the paper every morning, that kind of thing. I would cut out Michigan football articles, especially like in August during like summer practice when the season's just about to heat up, and I would tape them to my door. I was just as interested in the media side as I was the actual sports that were going on. And then I think around probably around like 2013 or so, I started reading MGO blog, which is like a hyper focused Michigan sports blog, and the way that those guys write and the way that they do things and their personalities, I just really related to, and I decided that at that point it was something I could see myself doing professionally, if possible. And so I went to Eastern, and I got a journalism degree, which is not really all that important. You don't necessarily need a journalism degree to do this, but I started writing for the student newspaper. I was probably overly aggressive in like going after the athletic director on certain things, and just being, just being hypercritical of Eastern's sports programs, which is not hard to do. It's some pretty low hanging fruit, but I think that got the attention of a kid that used to, or a guy, I should say, that used to go to Eastern, and he worked at the news at the time. And he emailed me and said, "Hey, I think you'd be a fit at the news. At the news, they're always looking for younger people, not necessarily younger, but people coming out of college, um, to help them out, answering phone calls for high school football games in the fall, that kind of stuff. And then once you start doing that and they start to trust you, then they start asking you to do more and more stuff. And over the last, it's been 3.5 years that I've worked for them. I've done everything from answering phones to Pistons games, and then like everything in between. So like girls' high school lacrosse, or like the wrestling high school championships at Ford Field, just wherever they need somebody that they don't already have a dedicated beat reporter is kind of where they end up sending me.
Nice. So
So
you
that's
started at
kind
the
of how I got into
bottom.
it.
You've started at the bottom and you've worked your way up to the, a pretty good ways in just 3.5 years, right?
Yeah, I mean I'm still definitely a small fish, at very small fish at the
Mhm.
news. But I think like probably one of the most important things, if you talk to people that have really, really been able to make a living in sports writing, it's important to have clips. What that means is you just have to have experience at a at least a semi-serious, sports media publication. And then theoretically, some of the bigger publications might take a look at you or give you a chance at some point. It's definitely a grind, and it's not even at the highest levels. It's not super lucrative, but at times it's very fun and exciting. So
Honestly, it would make me think that at times, because you're a sports fan, at times it might not even feel like work. because it's something you're passionate about, something you've loved since a very young age. What can you tell us about your experience working specifically with the news, at thus
Yeah.
far?
Yeah, it is a lot. Um, it is a lot less. I don't I don't think they'd be bothered by me saying this. It's a lot less centralized and organized than I thought it would be when I got into it. Um, it's when you start working there, it's like, well, this is the newspaper, and you assume that things are really set, and they just do things one way and all this kind of stuff. But what I realized once I got into it, and this is really the nature of news gathering of any kind, sports or any kind, everybody is flying by the seat of their pants at every moment. Deadline rolls around, and maybe the game that you're covering goes into overtime. Things get crazy. It just is not. I assumed that everything was going to be perfectly laid out. This is how you do this. This is how you do this. And within the first week that I worked there, one of the assignment editors was just like, go out and cover this game. And that's literally the only instruction I was given. Just go out and cover this game. When it's over, just email your story to this guy and this guy, and that's it. They don't have the time to, like, they're not going to hold your hand with anything. It's just like, hey, figure it out. And sometimes that can be frustrating, but you realize that's what everyone else there is doing. They're just figuring it out on the fly. And somehow it's still a miracle to me. Somehow all of that turns into an actual print newspaper, sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, and then it winds up on your doorstep the next day. That's still like a big part of what they do. But there's, of course, all the online stuff, all that kind of stuff. So it's a big operation, but at the same time, it's not as organized as you would think that it is.
Well, I can tell from the sound of it, you really enjoy it,
Yeah, I do.
speak.
I do. I don't know how long print newspapers are going to be around. It may be, they could be gone in 5 years or 10 years or 30 years. I have no idea. But watching the newspaper come together at night, and watching everyone send in their stories, and then the editors editing as fast as they can, the designers are putting on the page trying to make it fit. That whole part of it is a big rush, and it's a lot of fun, as long as it goes okay and you don't screw anything up that costs anybody
Right.
else time or consternation. So it's good.
That's awesome. Byron, do you have any questions for him?
Yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. So, Eric, I know you cover, like you said, a lot of high school sports. I know there's a phenom in your area here,
Yeah.
in Bates. Have you had an opportunity to cover that young man?
I have not had an opportunity to cover Amani. I wish that I have, but yeah, I like that kid is an absolute phenom. A guy that I work with at the news, Matt Shook, he teamed up with a filmmaker, and they actually made like a little documentary about him. I can't remember how long it is, maybe just 20 or 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
But that was really eye-opening. I mean, it's hard. Normally, like a high school game, I will just, if I'm going to cover it, I'll just go to it. I might email an athletic director of a high school ahead of time, but with Ipsy Lincoln games, it's like you have to like, they play at the Convo Center, which is
Yeah,
EMU's
that
place,
E-turn.
and like it's a whole process to even get a media credential for a high school game.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
it's absolutely incredible. But yeah, it looks like he's going to be jumping right to the NBA, and good for him. I mean, if there are rule changes and whatnot,
Right.
it'd break my heart if he went to Michigan State. It would absolutely kill me. But
Yeah, I'm hoping for it. Yeah, but well, who has been the top high school player that you've seen or you've covered? Is there
Yeah.
anyone that jumped out to you, girl or boy?
Right, yeah. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rakia Jackson. She played at she's a basketball player at Detroit Edison.
Yeah.
She just wrapped up her freshman season at Mississippi State. So I watched her in I think the state semifinals last year. And I mean, she was incredible. I think she's 6'4", 6'5". You know, the girl that was trying to guard her, did as good of a job as she
Yeah.
could, but she was like 5'8" or something like that. I mean, I haven't seen someone just be so like dominant like that in any of the games that I've covered. So that one really stood out. The other team, I can't even remember what team it was now, but their entire game plan was built around stopping her. She was just like this massive woman among all these like little midgets basically, and they hacked her. I mean, it was like I felt like I was watching like Shaq in high school. Like
Really?
that's
Wow.
like the feeling that
funny.
I got from her, and she just imposed her will on those poor girls. But Donovan Peoples-Jones stands out. I mean, he was just insanely athletic at Cass Tech. The games of his that I actually covered, he didn't do anything like wildly insane. Like he had that one catch in the state playoffs. I wasn't at that game. I wish I could have been, but
The Trey, that was the only time I saw him play.
okay, yeah, yep.
The
That
overtime
was
winner.
legendary. Yep. He was so good. And then Jalen Kelly Powell, who has not gotten a lot of run at Michigan, I thought was just as impressive as Donovan Peoples-Jones in the games that I saw. But he hasn't panned out so far. So
That might lead us into this next question I have for you, because you write for the Wolverines Lounge, right?
mm-hmm.
Can you take a moment to share your opinion of the current state of the University of Michigan program?
Oh God, what a layered question right now.
Yeah.
I was if you so when they hired Harbaugh, if you just even putting aside like all the Michigan man stuff and all the Bo Schembechler connections and all that, if you put all that aside and just look at the teams that he's coached at Stanford and San Diego and the 49ers, and the way that he's been able to turn teams around and then take them to the highest levels, you had to be pretty thrilled with the hire. You had to be thinking to yourself, okay, here's a guy who's gonna at least get us competing with Ohio State again. And so that that has obviously not panned out. Michigan is not competing with Ohio State. All throughout the season, if you squint, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I could see how they might be okay in that game, and then they get blown out every year, except for 2016. But that doesn't mean that the team hasn't gotten better under Harbaugh. They definitely have. It's better than the Rich Rod years. It's better than the Hoke years. It's probably about on par with most of the Carr years, which is what I grew up with. It's probably even on par with a chunk of the Schembechler years as well. So, the question of where that program's at right now really boils down to, I think, sort of your expectations. And it's that 1997 national championship I'll never be able to get out of my head. So that's kind of where the bar is, but I understand other people who would say, well, we only lose 3 or 4 games a year, and that's, about what we should expect. So I'm okay with that sort of thing. But I think that the really, really sad thing about it is the quarterback development. When Harbaugh got here, if the rest of the team completely stunk, but the quarterback, was good and developed, I think like people would be, happy. But he's supposed to be a quarterback guru, and the QBs relative to their competition, I know they're putting up big numbers. Shea Patterson, put up massive numbers. But in this day and age, you don't everybody's putting up massive throwing numbers.
Right.
So it just isn't, those raw stats are just not as impressive as you would think that they would be. Why do I find myself watching Michigan games and wishing that Chad Henne was still the quarterback, even though Shea Patterson, outthrew him by several thousand yards over their careers? But it just feels like relative to the competition, Michigan QBs are just not getting over the hump. And it's so frustrating looking down in Columbus. They're just churning out high-level QBs like it's nothing.
Clockwork.
Right. It's ridiculous. So that has been really disappointing. But I mean, do I think Harbaugh should be replaced? Well, I lived through the Rich Rod and the Hoke years, and so no. If they were to hire someone else, theoretically, who could they get that's going to be better than Harbaugh? So yeah, I mean, I'm mixed. I have mixed emotions about it right now. So
yeah,
Well,
the
it
grass
seems
isn't
like
always greener. You guys have learned that the hard way.
it seems like, like you said, they're getting the job done as far as they've restored the program to where it was basically under Lloyd Carr, but it's definitely difficult seeing teams like Ohio State continually every year compete for a national championship. Byron made a good point on our podcast earlier this year that Michigan's getting a lot of high-level recruits, and we got into a little debate about it, digging in a little bit deeper. It seems like Michigan Wolverines aren't developing the talent, and maybe and that's something that they do in Columbus very well, and I think that might be attributed to a lot of our shortcomings, because I'm a Wolverines fan too, and it's been hard to deal with, because we have this expectation to get back to 1997, and the task seems, I guess, insurmountable sometimes.
yeah, I was in Michigan Stadium for the Ohio State game, just last year in 2019, and when Ohio State was just running all over us there, probably sometime in the second quarter. So it really just, you could feel everyone just, it started to feel like it could never happen.
It probably just became deflating.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You just got that deja vu feeling all over again. I was in the big house for 2017 as well. And, though like 2017, 2019, certainly not Harbaugh's best teams, but you just thought that they would have a chance, that they'd be up for that game. And, when they just got ground into mush, it just and it keeps happening over and over and over again. My friends and my cousin in the stands, we're all talking about what possible rule changes to recruiting could turn the tide. It feels like there needs to be some massive shift in something. Basically the deck has to be stacked for Michigan to even compete with Ohio State right now. And it's so deflating, so deflating if you're a Michigan fan, but it gives you plenty to talk about. So
Absolutely. So let me ask you this directly. What do you really think it's going to take? I mean, are the shadows of, Bo Schembechler and the expectations there just way too big for Jim Harbaugh, and trying to eclipse Ohio State? Is this something you believe will ever happen, or do you think it's just too much?
Yeah, well, I think there are two major things that need to happen. First of all, Ohio State is, and when we're talking about Michigan's program, I think it is important right now, especially because they seem to have gotten over the hump with Michigan State, and they seem to be winning sort of the proper amount of games every year, that the only real discussion with Michigan football right now is in relation to Ohio State. That's all that matters right now. But I think it's because of that, it's important to remember that Ohio State is on a pretty historic run for them. If you were to go back and look at all the over 100 years of football, Ohio State hasn't been this good for this long, probably ever. So theoretically, that's not going to hold forever. Eventually, Ohio State is not going to have 2 out of the first 3 picks in every NFL draft, right? They're going to drop back to the pack in some way, shape, or form. And that, I think, will be obviously a great advantage to Michigan, as long as they're in a position to take advantage of it. And then the other big systemic change that could happen that I think could really even the playing field is if there are big changes to the NCAA, which it looks like this could happen sometime in the next 5 or 10 years, where schools can more openly just pay players. That will essentially put Michigan on more of an even recruiting level with Ohio State and with the SEC teams. No, I don't think any big D1 school has totally clean recruiting. It just doesn't exist. But I do think that Michigan tries to stay on a certain sort of level of clean recruiting that a lot of other teams don't even bother to mess around with. And if schools can just start paying players, which ethically and morally they probably should anyway, then it'll essentially put everybody on more of an even footing, or it'll put all the big teams on more of an even footing. If you've got the money, and theoretically Michigan will, they can go out and get any recruit they want. And recruiting has been a part of this. Michigan has recruited well under Harbaugh, but they haven't recruited like Urban Meyer recruits. They haven't recruited like Ryan Day recruits so far. So that gap needs to be closed, and I don't know if it can close without some sort of massive systemic change in the way that the NCAA does business.
Byron, do you agree with Eric's take?
Being
a Michigan State fan, I'm sure you have some interesting viewpoints on the matter.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like when you look at a team like Michigan or any other school, when it comes down to it, I feel like a lot of kids are going to these top-tier programs because they have the opportunity to win. And it's almost like, the NBA, how they have these super teams, like these kids in college are now trying to form these super teams. And you see the talent rolling in seemingly each year to the same school. So you're seeing your Alabamas, your Clemsons, your Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma and Clemson have been in 4 straight college football playoffs. And Alabama's always right there. I think this was the first year they hadn't made it in quite some time. So there's just always a lot of talent rolling to those schools. I don't think the monetary thing will level the playing field. Like right now, I feel as though, because I feel like Ohio State can offer the same money as Michigan, same as Alabama, same as Clemson. Like any team in the Big Ten can offer that same amount of money, unless you're a smaller school like Northwestern,
Yeah, winning begets winning. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Kids want to play on winning teams that put kids in the NFL. That's always going to be their number one recruiting concern, I'm sure.
Definitely. But at the same time, you got to think, if you have a donor or a billionaire, like let's say you're the owner of the Miami Dolphins. What's his name? Stephen Ross?
Mm-hmm.
Say there's a big time prospect out there that he wants to go to Michigan. What's to keep that guy from offering a young man and his family a substantial amount of money or lifestyle to go and play at University of Michigan? I think when you start talking about paying these players, I know Byron and I talked about it before, this change in landscape as far as the rules goes, really opening the floodgates, and it's going to expose these kids to a lot more things than we think.
Absolutely. I mean, you're a pro at that point. Once you start getting paid, you're a professional, and you have to make certain decisions as a professional, so you're going to see people make bad decisions based on money. And, you may not see things pan out. You may see guys get paid coming out of high school. They didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Someone's offering them $2 million to go to this school. You may not see that kid develop to his full talent. he's just gotten paid. Now he can take care of his family. So, you know, you might see guys get fat cat syndrome. You just never know what that will do to the people.
Yeah, that's definitely going to happen. There will be probably if schools can start more openly paying players, there's going to be stories of guys that, get that check and then essentially check out. But I feel like overarching all of it, like the top 20 or maybe 25 programs are making so much money off of these kids, so much money, that I feel like it's even if it might have some negative ramifications, it's the only right thing, it's the only moral ethical thing for these big time schools to do at this point. But in a sense, this is already happening. It's just happening under the table. It's just happening in ways that don't get reported to the NCAA, right? It's we used to hear all these hilarious rumors about Braylon Edwards and the cars that he had on Michigan's campus, and I don't want to make it seem like Michigan's above all this stuff. They're not. But there are some, like in the SEC, it's at a completely different level than it is in most of the Big Ten. All this stuff needs to be brought out of the shadows. There are all these bag men that are, moving money from here and there, and it's created this just sort of like illicit sort of mess that the NCAA just chooses to ignore right now, but everyone knows exists. And I just think the whole thing needs to be cleaned up. And then selfishly, as a Michigan fan, I feel like that would help. That would help their chances. Who knows? But
so let me ask you this: once this legislation actually goes into effect, do you see the floodgates opening, I guess, with people coming forward or coming clean or being more willing to talk about the benefits that they did have while in college at different programs around the country?
No, I don't think. I mean, I think the guys that went through it and maybe got $500 handshakes or whatever, they're never gonna sell out. The people that made that happen.
Right.
I don't think that there would be much of an incentive for them to do that. And players tend to be really loyal to their colleges too. So they would never want to do something that would
deface the program.
Exactly right. Yeah, that kind of thing. Unless it's like Miami or something where where it's almost like some wild badge of honor,
Right.
But yeah, I don't think. I think a lot of the guys that have already made it, they would just probably clam up. They would stay quiet about it. There wouldn't be much of an incentive.
Definitely. Well, let's switch up gears here. We've talked a lot about the University of Michigan football program. Let's talk about the Detroit Lions. So the draft just wrapped up. What were your thoughts about everything that happened over the past few days?
Yeah, I think that the Lions, did what they had to do, addressed many of their needs, and the kind of the consensus grade on their draft seems to be like a B+, A- kind of a thing, and that makes a lot of sense. It's the Lions, so I don't know if any of that will ever actually matter once it comes time, to play games. I'm more sure of anything in the sports world that the Lions will just screw it up. They will find a way to like it just won't work out for whatever reason.
It's funny to hear you say that because us all being from the Detroit area and being lifelong Lions fans, for those of you out there listening, we've been fans of a team that's been living in infamy our entire lives, and that seems to be the common response among most fans, whether it be the delivery guy or the guy on the news or your grandpa's. Like, it's the Lions. They're going to find a way to mess it up.
Yep.
And it's just it's funny to hear that from so many different people, especially in the past few days with the draft going on.
Yeah, they're just they're a cursed franchise. It's forget about all the historical stuff. Like, I don't even really fully trust Matt Patricia as a as a good coach. It's been 2 seasons, and results are mixed to bad so far. So, you can give him all these great new players, and I just don't actually know if he could still like put that together into like a functional football team yet. So, we will find out. We will find out in the next year or two. Hopefully, I mean, if there's an NFL season, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can finally, put together a winner. I was a little shocked when Jim Caldwell got fired, a couple seasons ago. He went 9-7 2 years in a row, which is pretty good for the Lions.
He has the
then
second highest
axed.
winning percentage of any of the coaches they've had dating back to the 1950s.
I thought he had the highest.
And he got fired.
I thought he had the highest winning percentage of any Lions coach.
Whether it's first or second, I believe it's second.
Doesn't matter. It wasn't fireable.
The other one was that, I can't remember his name, but it was that coach who was with the team when they won the world championship in the 50s. I believe he was the highest. But, needless to say, I guess that would go a long way to tell you about the decision-making on behalf of the ownership. You fire a guy who's taken you to the playoffs 2 years in a row, 9-7, and you bring in someone who's virtually untested at the pro level as a head coach, and it really seems like a gamble, when you're pretty much starting to hit your stride, from a sense with Jim Caldwell. So I guess, in my opinion, I think the issues with the Detroit Lions run a lot deeper than just, the coaching staff, and the general managers on a year-to-year basis. Byron, what were your thoughts on the draft?
I thought they addressed a lot of needs, to be honest with you. I would have liked to see them take a defensive tackle much higher than the 6th round. I know that was a huge need that they had, especially since they moved on from Snacks Harrison. So I would have loved to see them, reach out maybe in the 3rd or 4th round, or trade back into the 2nd round and grab them another defensive tackle, because that's a position of need for them. But kind of based on what Patricia and what they did in the draft, I'm happy they addressed a lot of the other needs. It's going to be competitive, and maybe they go into free agency and find some defensive tackle that's out there, because they still have a significant amount of cap space compared to many teams in the NFL. So hopefully they'll make a move like that to address that big gaping need that we have.
Absolutely. So Byron, I know at the beginning of the year you were really big on DeAndre Swift coming out of Georgia, and you even mentioned him as being one of your early surprise candidates for the Heisman in the season. Didn't pan out that way, but I was able to watch some highlight tape on him, and I can see what you like about the guy. He's very capable of doing a lot of different things, very elusive, and he to me, he's not a home run back, like maybe your Jonathan Taylors or your J.K. Dobbins. But what I did like that I saw about him is it seemed like he was a big play waiting to happen, where he could take a little swing pass and all of a sudden turn it into a 15, 20-yard gain. Eric, what are your thoughts on DeAndre Swift?
No, Swift was a great pick. 6.2 yards per carry last year. And that's in the SEC, and that wasn't a flash in the pan, because he had 6.4 yards per carry the year before that. This is a guy that 20 years ago, he easily would have gone in the 1st round. Teams are a little skittish about taking, running backs in the 1st round these days. They have such a short shelf life, all that stuff, so he falls to the 2nd round. But it was a really good pick. I can't believe I'm saying that about, a Lions draft, but it was a good, responsible pickup. He was there, and I felt like they had to take him. It's the Lions, so he'll have some, career-ending injury in minicamp or something like that. I'm not hoping that for him, but he'll factor really big into the rotation next year. It reminds me a little bit of like when I was younger and like the Kevin Jones pick. There's somebody else that I'm forgetting who hung around for a good 3 or 4 years and were like a decent back. I know that maybe sounds like I'm down on him. I'm not. I think he's going to be a good player. But it's they
Sounds
needed
like you've
they
had your
needed
heart
help in the
broken.
running game.
It sounds like you've had your heart broken by the Lions a time or two, which
many
is
times.
understandable. So, what did you guys think about the picks in the third round? A lot of people were suggesting that Julian Aquara and Jonah Jackson gave us a lot of great value for picks in that round. Byron, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like the pickup of Aquara. His brother is actually already on the Lions, so that'll help. He's from Michigan, so returning home from Indiana, from where he played college ball at Notre Dame. So I think it'll help having his brother there, having some people around him, because he comes from, a very stable home. He's from the Farmington Hills area. And I think he's a good pickup for us. And then the Jonah Jackson, I think he was one of the best graded out, one of the best running blocking offensive guards in the draft. So I think that was a good pickup as well, considering we've known since Patricia's got there what they've wanted to do, but haven't been able to do, which is run the football. So hopefully with what they did in the draft, something will finally work, because what we've seen so far has not. So all we can do is either remain optimistic or become a pessimist and just give up on them.
No, I completely agree with you. I liked the Jackson pick. There were some mock drafts, that suggested the guy might be a late first round pick, which may have been overshooting things, but really, like you said, it adds that extra element to the run game. And what I also liked about the pick was there were a lot of people saying that he could have came out and done very well in the NFL draft last year and been picked high, but he chose to actually transfer to Ohio State because he wanted to play against the highest level of competition, which I think speaks volumes about the character of the individual. So it might be a good selection for a leader on that offensive line moving forward in the future.
Yeah, Eric, what were your thoughts on those picks?
Well, like Okwara, I again really liked. They needed an edge player, and they got him. And he played well enough at Notre Dame last year to justify a third round pick on him. So that was good. The Jackson pick was, this is the exact sort of pick that in years past the Lions don't make. That's where they just go and draft wide receiver or something like that. But they need offensive linemen, and they need run blocking offensive linemen, and there maybe wasn't a better one in the draft than that guy. So yeah, they were 21st in rush yards per game last year. That's just especially for the way that the Lions seem to want to play on offense. That's not going to work. They've got a lot of weapons in the pass game, and you just need an average run game can make that so much better, basically. So if they can get that number up to 15th in the league or 14th in the league, and right there, second and third round, they get two guys that theoretically could put them there. So it was, the Lions they're just Bob Quinn making all these great picks all of a sudden. So
it's like he came out of nowhere after 5 years.
Right.
I guess he needed a little pressure put on him from Martha Ford.
Hey, sometimes that's what it takes, So in my opinion, I thought the draft, through day 2 was a great draft, on Bob Quinn's. And the one part of the draft that really stood out to me as being questionable, that maybe kept him from really hitting a home run and getting one of those top drafts in the league, was the 5th round, drafting wide receiver Quintez Cephas and running back Jason Huntley. Eric, what were your thoughts about those picks? Quintez Cephas has a lot of character issues, lacks ideal speed, and then Jason Huntley grabbing another running back.
Yeah, I've spent a decent amount of time watching Cephas, just because of Michigan games, basically. And that guy's good. I don't know if they need him, but he's good. It was a good value, but the Lions are in a good spot at wide receiver. But that's the thing, in the 5th round, you're thinking maybe 2-3 years down the road, who might we need, to step up and get lucky on a draft pick with. And so I liked that one. The running back out of New Mexico State in the 5th round, that one was weird. I honestly don't know anything about him. It's New Mexico State. I don't know too many people that were scouting their games, but especially after having taken Swift in the 2nd round, it didn't seem to make a ton of sense. The running back trash heap is massive, and you can pull a guy off there. If you need a 3rd or 4th back, you can pull a guy off of the waiver wire pretty easily, and it seems like that's kind of where this guy's headed. I have no idea really with him, but it doesn't feel like their 5th round picks matched any of their immediate needs. But you feel much better saying that about a 5th round than a 1st or 2nd round. So I think they're just taking flyers on these guys at that point.
Byron, what about you?
Yeah, Mike, I tend to agree with you. And I do agree with your take, Eric. Cephas is a good ball player. However, I thought there was a better player there from Michigan. I thought Donovan Peoples-Jones was a player that they should have taken there. The guy's got all kinds of talent, and I know he hasn't had the greatest quarterback play in his time there. So I was hoping that he could be a steal, and I kept seeing him fall later in the draft. I was like, someone's got to take this guy because that's a hidden gem. Right. I don't know what's going on with him, if he's a bad interviewer. I know he worked out well at the combine. He had decent numbers. So I don't know why they elected not to draft him and go that route, but they must have saw something that I obviously didn't. And then with Huntley, again, I'm there with you, Eric. I was a bit baffled. I mean, you're drafting Theo Riddick 2.0. You just cut Theo last year. This guy's a scat bag. He had over 100 catches, 1,000 receiving yards. Like, okay, the guy's going to get hit. He's a 5th rounder. I mean, what are we doing here? There's other needs that needed to be addressed, other shots in the dark you could have done. If you're going to throw stuff at the wall, just throw it at a position that we really need. You already addressed the running back position.
No, I agree with you. And I think if you're going to make a decision to, add a running back or a wide receiver, in the 5th round, I think there were definitely some better picks you could have taken. I agree with you on the Donovan Peoples-Jones pick. Also, another guy that actually fell to the 7th round, which was a little surprising. I thought for sure Bob Quinn was going to zero in on this guy, considering the theme of the draft where he was going after guys from Ohio State, KJ Hill, who fell to the 7th round. Who's a speedier slot receiver, I think, is somebody who may have been able to help the Lions. Eric, can you provide us some insight on why you think the Lions may have skipped over Donovan Peoples-Jones in favor of Cephas?
I definitely no insider knowledge, but this is my guess. So when DPJ was coming out of high school, the one sort of knock against him is that at Cass Tech, he ran one route every play, basically. The guy was he's so fast, especially at the high school level. He was a lot bigger than all the guys covering him. He would burn down the field. They would chuck it up to him. He would always go and get it. He was just a machine that way. So coming into college, the thought was like, he's a smart guy. He hasn't need to be a precise route runner in high school, but he has all the physical tools, and we should be able to mold this guy into a really good route runner. Essentially somebody that just always gets open. And then over the course of his college career, you're watching Michigan games, always thinking like, why aren't they throwing to him? Why aren't they throwing to him? Why are all these balls going to Ronnie Bell? Instead of DPJ. Why isn't he getting more opportunities? And I think with the camera angle when you're watching a game, you can't always tell what's going on downfield. And just from watching live a few times and the all 11 tape a couple times, he just wasn't getting open as often as people thought that he probably was. That's a really just like amateur analysis, but that's kind of what I saw. That said, if you bring him into the NFL, where there are no limits on practice time, theoretically, because all the rest of the tools are there. I've interviewed him before. He's a smart, articulate kid. He really his athleticism. I don't know if it really showed all that well at U of M, but all the tools are there for him to be a great player if he can just really nail down exactly how to run these routes in the most precise, perfect way so that I'm going to be wide open so that my QB cannot possibly ignore me.
You have to
and I do think he'll get there.
You have to think that, it may have something to do with as well the lack of consistency at the quarterback position for Michigan, the past few years, specifically with the play by Shea Patterson.
Yeah, I don't know if Patterson was always finding the most open guy. As a matter of fact, he definitely wasn't. And that certainly did not help DPJ's case. And if you like some of the stories that have come out of the draft, where he was telling people that like, oh, I did as much as I could at Michigan, and that's pretty much purely code for I was open and they didn't pass me the ball. And I think that's a chunk of it, but the other half of that is that I just don't know if he was getting open as much as he thought he was, or as much as Michigan fans thought he was.
Real quickly here, we're running out of time, but I wanted to get your insight, Eric. If you're Bob Quinn, where do you take the Detroit Lions from here at this point?
Well, St. Louis doesn't have a team anymore, so maybe you just move them down there. No, I think he. Oh man, I still just I don't trust Matt Patricia fully yet. So you seem to hopefully they make some good free agent signings and you see some sort of progress this year. They won 3 games last year? 4 games?
3 games, tied 1.
Right, yeah. They lost 1-3 and 1 tie. So you got to see some kind of improvement this year to justify keeping Patricia. If it looks just as bad or worse, you've got to fire Patricia. And then Bob Quinn would be hiring his second coach, basically, third coach that he's worked with, if you include Caldwell, but second one that he's hired. And that's probably his last coach that he gets a chance to hire. If that coach doesn't work out, he's probably in the dust heap. But if everything goes well this year, let's say they do improve, let's say Stafford stays at sort of the same level that he's been at, which has been pretty darn good when he's been healthy. Well, then the question becomes, how long is Stafford's window open? Can they really make a run at the playoffs, or God forbid the Super Bowl, with Stafford as QB? And if you start to see concerning signs about Stafford's accuracy or arm strength or health this season, then all of a sudden it becomes forget everything else. We've got to find a new QB. So those are kind of I think those are the 3 sort of ways that I see the coming season playing out for him.
So essentially you believe that the Lions are at a crossroads at this point under Matt Patricia.
I do. Yeah. And I think other than maybe a coach's first year, teams are always at crossroads. That's what's fun about this and gives people just endless, topics to talk about. It's the NFL, because it's a capped league. every team is under flux. It looks like the Kansas Chiefs are going to be absolute world beaters again. But would I be surprised if they all of a sudden have a down year? Not at all. The NFL can just get crazy. Like Tom Brady plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, this stuff is absolutely wild.
Doesn't get any crazier than that, let me tell you.
It doesn't.
Well, that's all I have for you, Eric. Byron, do you have any questions for Eric or anything to add?
No, I just want to thank Eric for hopping on with us. It's truly a pleasure to have you on. Give us some insight from a true journalist, our first journalist that's been on the podcast. So truly appreciate you taking this time to hop on with us and give us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I was certainly happy to hang out with you guys anytime.
Yeah, we appreciate having you, Eric. It's been a blast, and I definitely appreciate the insight. We look forward to hearing from you again.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks. Have a great one, Eric, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, stay safe, guys.